"She's entitled to half," her lawyer declared, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. My wife, Chloe, 20 years my junior, smirked at me from across the room, her young lover's hand resting possessively on her shoulder. They thought they were about to fleece a lonely old fool out of his retirement savings. They laughed, thinking my life was over. They had no idea I was the one holding the guillotine, and the show was just about to begin. If you've ever felt underestimated or betrayed, then hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me, because the lesson at the end of this story might just save you a lifetime of pain. The air in the courtroom was cold and sterile, smelling faintly of old paper and cheap floor polish. It was a smell that settled in your bones, the scent of endings. I sat at the defendant's table, my back straight, my hands folded neatly on the polished wood. I wore a simple grey suit, the kind of thing a man wears when he doesn't want to be noticed. Across the room, Chloe was a splash of vibrant, predatory colour. She wore a tight, crimson dress that was entirely inappropriate for a legal proceeding, but perfectly suited for the message she was sending. I am young, I am desirable, and I have won. Next to her sat Julian, a boy who looked like he'd been assembled from a kit of spare parts for a gym advertisement. His biceps strained against the fabric of his too-tight suit jacket, and a self-satisfied smirk was practically chiseled onto his face. His hand rested on Chloe's shoulder, a gesture not of support, but of ownership. Her lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, with slicked-back hair and the eyes of a shark who's just smelled blood, was in his element. He paced before the judge, his voice dripping with synthetic pity. "Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Chloe Vance, a vibrant woman in the prime of her life, was deceived. She entered into this marriage with Mr. Arthur Vance in good faith, believing it to be a partnership of equals. Instead, she found herself in a gilded cage, controlled by a man who treated her not as a wife, but as a possession." I nearly scoffed. A gilded cage? I lived in a 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet suburb. The fanciest thing in it was a coffee machine I'd bought on sale. Mr. Vance, a man of 50, used his age and supposed financial stability to lure in a woman of 30. Thorne continued, gesturing toward me as if I were a museum exhibit on prehistoric fossils. He promised her a life of comfort and security, but what he gave her was isolation and emotional neglect. He refused to socialize, clipped coupons, and scrutinized every penny she spent. From the corner of my eye, I saw Chloe dab at a perfectly dry eye with a tissue. Julian squeezed her shoulder, whispering something that made her lips curl into a faint smile. They were enjoying this. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a public execution, and they were the guests of honor. They thought they were shaming me, but all they were doing was stoking the furnace inside my chest. They saw a tired, defeated old man. They didn't see the years of discipline, the patience of a predator that had learned to wait. They didn't know that every word they spoke, every lie they told, was just another turn of the screw on a trap I had set months ago. Thorne paused for dramatic effect. Chloe gave this man 2 years of her youth, 2 of the most valuable years of a woman's life. For that sacrifice, for that emotional distress, she is entitled to recompense. She is entitled to half of the marital assets. Everything. The word hung in the air. Everything. Chloe and Julian exchanged a triumphant glance. Their plan was working. They had successfully painted the picture. A poor, young victim and a stingy, old monster. The judge, A woman in her late 50s with a weary expression looked over at me. I met her gaze and held it. My face, a perfect mask of calm neutrality. Let them have their moment. Let them build their case on a foundation of lies. The higher they built it, the further it would have to fall. 2 years. It felt like a lifetime ago. A scene from another man's life. I remembered the first time I saw her. It was at a small, independent coffee shop called The Daily Grind, a place I frequented more for the quiet atmosphere than the quality of the coffee. I was a creature of habit, a man whose life had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm after my first wife. Eleanor had passed away from cancer 5 years prior. Eleanor and I had been married for 25 years. Our life was a partnership built on mutual respect and quiet understanding. Her absence left a silence in my house that was deafening. So, I filled the silence with routines: work, the gym, the coffee shop, home. Repeat. I wasn't unhappy, but I was adrift. Then Chloe walked in. She wasn't just a person. She was an event. She had a laugh that could cut through the low hum of the espresso machine and hair the color of honey that seemed to catch every bit of light in the room. She was arguing with the barista about the temperature of her latte, but she was doing it with a smile so charming that the young man behind the counter was practically melting. She seemed full of life, a stark contrast to the grayscale world I'd been living in. I was sitting at my usual table in the corner, working on some preliminary sketches for a new software architecture, a habit I never broke from my old life in tech. She caught me looking and, instead of being offended, she smiled and walked over. "Is my latte drama that entertaining?" she asked, her voice a playful melody. We talked for 2 hours that day. She told me she was a freelance graphic designer, struggling to make ends meet, but full of big dreams. She spoke of wanting to travel, of wanting a family, of wanting a life filled with passion and adventure. She seemed so genuine, so full of a hopeful energy I thought I'd lost forever. She asked me what I did, and I gave her the simple, honest answer I gave everyone. "I'm retired," I said. "I worked in software development for a long time, did well enough to quit early." She seemed impressed, but not overly so. It was my quiet confidence, she later told me, that she found attractive. She didn't press for details about my finances. She seemed more interested in the man I was, asking about Eleanor, listening with what I mistook for sincere empathy as I spoke of our life together. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a widower, not as a recluse, but as a man. We started meeting for coffee every day. Those meetings turned into dinners. I found myself looking forward to her calls, to the sound of her laughter. She made me feel younger, like the world was full of possibilities again. She never once made me feel my age was a barrier. She said she preferred older men, that they were more stable, more sure of themselves. A man who had built a career on analyzing data and seeing patterns, completely missed the most obvious pattern of all. I was lonely, and she was a beautiful, charming woman telling me everything I wanted to hear. It was the oldest trick in the book, and I, a man who thought himself smarter than most, walked right into it. We married 6 months after we met, in a small ceremony at the local courthouse, with just a few friends present. I bought a comfortable but far from extravagant house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and kids rode their bikes in the street. To me, it was perfect. It was a home, not a statement. For the first year, it seemed like Chloe felt the same way. She threw herself into decorating, filling the space with bright colors and modern furniture. She cooked dinner for me most nights. Simple meals we'd eat while talking about our day. It felt normal. It felt like the life I had lost a chance to have again. I was happy, or at least I had convinced myself I was. But slowly, the cracks began to appear. They started as subtle things. Little comments dropped into conversation. We'd be watching a movie, and a scene in a lavish mansion would appear on screen. Can you imagine living like that? Artie? She'd sigh, not having to worry about a single thing. I'd gently remind her that we didn't have to worry about a single thing. The house was paid for. My investments provided a more than comfortable income. But comfort wasn't what she was after. She was after opulence. Her questions about my past became more frequent and more pointed. It was no longer about the projects I worked on. It was about the companies I'd sold, the patents I held. You never really talk about your big successes, she'd say, pouting slightly as she refilled my wine glass. Were you, like, a big deal? Did you make, real money? I always downplayed it. I did okay, sweetheart. We have enough. That's what matters. This answer never satisfied her. Her frustration grew. The coupons I clipped, a habit from a lifetime of being financially prudent, became a source of ridicule. It's embarrassing, Arthur, she'd snap. We're not poor. Why do you act like we are? My 10-year-old sedan, reliable and fully paid for, became a hunk of junk. She wanted a brand new Mercedes. My preference for a quiet night in over a flashy gala became a sign that I was old and boring. The spending started to escalate. Packages from high-end designers would arrive daily. She'd claim they were for her portfolio, to keep up with trends for her graphic design work. But I never saw any portfolio. I never saw any clients. The money was just disappearing. When I tried to talk to her about setting a budget, she'd burst into tears. I thought you loved me, she'd cry. Is my happiness not worth a stupid dress? You're so controlling. You just want to keep me locked up here, like some kind of maid. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. I was the villain for wanting financial responsibility. She was the victim for wanting to live a life of luxury she felt she was owed. The sweet, down-to-earth woman I thought I'd married was being replaced by a greedy, entitled stranger. I was beginning to realize that she hadn't fallen in love with me. She had fallen in love with an idea of me, a walking bank account that she was growing increasingly frustrated she couldn't crack open. The breaking point, the moment my willful blindness finally shattered, came about 18 months into our marriage. Chloe announced she was going on a girls' trip to Miami, just me and a couple of my old college friends. Artie, she said, her eyes wide and innocent. We just need to get away. Let our hair down. You know how it is. I didn't, but I feigned understanding. A part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in the fantasy, was happy for her. Maybe this was what she needed, a break to clear her head and come back as the woman I first met. I gave her my credit card for the trip. Have fun, sweetheart. Be safe. Don't worry about the cost. Just enjoy yourself. It was a test, a stupid, hopeful test. I wanted to see if she could be trusted with that freedom. She was gone for 5 days. She called every night, her voice bubbly and full of stories about the beach, the clubs, The funny things her friends had said. It all sounded so plausible, so innocent. She sent me pictures of herself smiling on a balcony overlooking the ocean, a cocktail in her hand. There were never any friends in the pictures. They're camera shy, she explained with a laugh when I asked. The day she came back, she was glowing. She threw her arms around me at the airport, showering me with kisses and telling me how much she missed me. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe everything was all right. She'd gotten it out of her system. We were back on track. That evening, as I was reconciling my credit card statement online, another lifelong habit, I saw it. The charges were what I expected: an expensive hotel, several high-end restaurant bills, a few boutique clothing stores. But then there was one charge that made my blood run cold. It was from a place called Serenity Spa. The charge was for a couple's paradise massage package. The details were right there on the digital receipt: 2 deep tissue massages, champagne, chocolate-covered strawberries, a private suite with a jacuzzi for 2. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe she took a friend. Maybe it was a mistake. But I knew, in that silent, sickening moment, I knew. The entire trip, the bubbly phone calls, the solo pictures, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed performance for an audience of 1. I felt a profound coldness spread through me. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a jealous husband. It was something far more dangerous. It was the icy calm of a man who has just been handed a declaration of war. I didn't say a word to her. I closed the laptop, went downstairs, and poured myself a bourbon. As I watched her unpack, chattering away about the crazy time she had with her friends, I looked at her and saw a complete stranger. The woman I thought I loved was gone. In her place was an enemy living under my roof. And I decided, right then and there, that this was a war I was not going to lose. My first instinct was to confront her, to throw the credit card statement in her face and demand an explanation. I wanted to see the panic in her eyes, to hear her stammer through the lies. But as the bourbon warmed my insides, a different part of my brain took over, the methodical, analytical part that had made me a fortune in the first place. A direct confrontation would be emotionally satisfying, but strategically idiotic. She would deny it, cry, accuse me of snooping, and twist it to make me the villain. She would become more careful, cover her tracks better. No. If I was going to deal with this, I needed irrefutable proof. I needed a complete picture of the betrayal. I needed data. The next morning, I told Chloe I had to fly out to Seattle for a few days to consult on a project with my old company. It was a lie, of course. My old company had been absorbed by a tech giant years ago. But she bought it without question, a little too eagerly. In fact, the moment my taxi pulled away from the curb, I didn't go to the airport. I went downtown to the office of a man named Frank Miller. Frank ran a private investigation firm that was known for 2 things: its absolute discretion and its staggering price tag. I'd used his firm once before, years ago, for corporate espionage work. Frank was a former FBI agent, a man with a face like a road map of bad neighborhoods and an uncanny ability to find out anything about anyone. I sat in his Spartan office and laid it all out. I gave him Chloe's name, her phone number, and the dates of the Miami trip. I told him about the spa receipt. I didn't betray any emotion. I presented it like a business problem. "I don't want speculation. Frank," I told him, my voice level. I want facts. I want to know who he is, where they go, how long this has been going on. I want photos, videos, financial records. I want to know everything. Frank listened, occasionally jotting down a note on a legal pad. He didn't offer condolences or judgments. He just nodded. This is a deep dive. Arthur, it won't be cheap. Discretion is never cheap. Frank, I replied, sliding a retainer check across his desk, an amount that would make most people gasp. He glanced at it, nodded once, and said, I'll be in touch. I spent the next 3 days in a downtown hotel, a ghost in my own city. I ordered room service and worked, mapping out financial strategies, moving assets, and creating firewalls. It was like preparing for a hostile takeover. Only the asset I was protecting was my own life on the 4th day. Frank called. I have the preliminary package for you, was all he said. When I arrived at his office, he slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. Inside was a meticulously detailed report. Her lover's name was Julian Croft. He was a 28-year-old personal trainer and aspiring social media influencer. They had met at a high-end gym Chloe had joined without telling me. The affair had been going on for 6 months. Frank's team had been thorough. There were photos of them kissing in a public park, of them entering and leaving a cheap motel on the edge of town, of him driving the car I'd bought her. There were copies of their text messages, filled with sickening pet names and contemptuous jokes at my expense. He called me the wallet. She called me the warden. The Miami trip wasn't their first. It was just their most brazen. The report was a systematic dismantling of my life. Every page was a fresh stab of betrayal. I read through the entire thing without flinching. The hurt was there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut. But it was overshadowed by a white-hot clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fling. This was a conspiracy. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively plundering me, with him as her co-conspirator. I closed the folder. Keep going, I told Frank. I want a continuous, real-time file. I want to know every dollar she gives him, every place they go. Spare no expense. He nodded. What's the end game? Arthur. I stood up and looked out his window at the city below. The end game, I said, my voice as cold as the glass, is that she is going to walk away from this with nothing but the clothes on her back and a story to tell. Going home that night was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The knowledge I possessed felt like a physical weight, a toxic substance coursing through my veins. Every object in the house seemed tainted. The bed we shared, the sofa where we watched movies, the kitchen table where she'd sit and lie to my face about her day. It was all a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know I was in a play. Chloe greeted me with a hug, a performance of wifely affection that was so flawless it was grotesque. I missed you so much. Artie. How was Seattle? She asked, her voice laced with a sweetness that now sounded like poison. It was productive, I replied, my voice a carefully controlled monotone. Long days, and so began the long game. I became an actor, playing the part of the devoted, slightly dotum, oblivious husband. It was a role that shredded my soul, piece by piece, day by day. I had to listen to her talk on the phone with her friends, knowing she was really talking to him. I had to watch her get dressed up for a girls' night out, knowing she was meeting him at some downtown bar. Frank's reports arrived weekly in a discreet email, each one a fresh catalogue of her deception. She'd given Julian $1,000 for new headshots. She'd paid for a weekend trip for him and his buddies to Las Vegas. She was using my money, the money I had earned over 30 years of relentless work and sacrifice, to fund the life of a worthless parasite who was sleeping with my wife. The rage was a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface. There were moments I came close to breaking. One evening, she came home late, smelling of a man's cologne I didn't wear. She claimed her car had broken down, and she'd had to get a ride from a random kind stranger. I knew from Frank's report that she'd spent the last 4 hours at Julian's apartment. I wanted to scream, to tear the house apart, to throw her out into the street. But I held it in. I clenched my fists until my knuckles were white and simply said, "Well, I'm glad you're home safe, sweetheart. We should get that car looked at tomorrow." Her relief was palpable. She thought she'd gotten away with it. Every time she lied, and I accepted it. Her confidence grew, and her contempt for me became more obvious. She saw my patience not as a strategy, but as weakness. She saw my quiet nature not as discipline, but as foolishness. She was getting bolder, more reckless, and that's exactly what I wanted. I needed her to overplay her hand. I needed her to believe, with every fiber of her being, that she was in complete control, that I was just a senile old fool who was too blind or too pathetic to see what was happening right under his nose. I endured the lies, the stolen money, the crocodile tears. I weathered the storm of her contempt, because I knew a bigger storm was coming. And when it hit, I would be the one holding the lightning. The end of the charade came on a Tuesday morning. It was a crisp autumn's day, the kind where the air is clean and the leaves are just beginning to turn. I was in my home office, reviewing a quarterly report from one of my holding companies, when the doorbell rang. Chloe was at the gym, or rather, at Julian's apartment. As Frank's morning update had informed me, I opened the door to a young man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. He asked if I was Arthur Vance. When I confirmed, he handed me a thick, legal-sized envelope. "You've been served," he said mechanically, and walked away. I knew what it was before I even opened it. I took it back to my office, sat down at my desk, and calmly sliced it open with a letter opener. The words at the top of the first page leaped out at me. Petition for dissolution of marriage. It had finally come. She had made her move. I read through the petition, my heart rate steady, my mind cold and clear. It was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of fabricated victimhood. It listed my cruel and unusual behavior, my financial stonewalling, and my emotional abandonment. It was all there. The narrative Thorne would later spin in the courtroom. But the real meat was in the attached list of demands. It was a declaration of war. She wanted the house, free and clear. She wanted the car, the new Mercedes she had finally bullied me into leasing for her 3 months prior. She wanted permanent, lifelong alimony to the tune of $20,000 a month, citing that her marriage to me had stalled her burgeoning career and that she would need years to recover professionally. And then, the grand prize, she demanded 50% of all my known assets. The petition included a preliminary financial disclosure, cobbled together by her lawyer, that estimated my net worth at a little over $4 million. They had clearly done some digging, found my primary brokerage account and the deed to the house. It was a respectable fortune for a retired software engineer. It was also less than 1% of my actual net worth. They had found the bait I had intentionally left visible. The rest, the real wealth, was buried deep in a labyrinth of trusts, shell corporations, and offshore holding companies, a structure I had built over decades, not to hide it from the IRS, but to protect it from predators. Predators exactly like her. I looked at the number on the page. A demand for $2 million, plus the house, the car, and a lifetime annuity. It was so brazen, so audacious, that I almost had to admire the sheer gall of it. She wasn't just leaving me. She was trying to liquidate me. This wasn't a divorce. It was a corporate raid. I folded the papers neatly and placed them on my desk. There was no sadness, no anger, no pain. There was only a quiet, profound sense of vindication. She had walked right into the center of the web. The time for acting, for playing the fool, was over. It was time to start pulling the strings. I picked up the phone and dialed the direct line of the most feared divorce attorney in the state. "Ms. Davenport," I said when her assistant answered. "It's Arthur Vance. Please tell her it's time." Before the court date, there was the mandatory pre-trial mediation. It was a legal formality, a last-ditch effort by the system to get parties to settle out of court. I knew it was a waste of time, but I had to attend. My lawyer, Eleanor Davenport, a woman with silver hair cut in a severe bob and a reputation for surgically dismantling her opponents, had advised me it was a necessary step. "Let them show their true colors. Arthur," she'd said. "Give them all the rope they need." The mediation took place in a sterile conference room in a downtown office building. I arrived with Ms. Davenport precisely on time. 5 minutes later, Chloe swept in, and she wasn't alone. Julian was with her, his arm wrapped around her waist. He wore a designer t-shirt that showed off his physique and a pair of ripped jeans that cost more than my first car. Bringing him was a calculated move, a power play designed to humiliate me, to rub my face in their victory. Thorne, her lawyer, looked momentarily uncomfortable, but Chloe shot him a look that silenced any potential objection. They sat on the opposite side of the long mahogany table. The mediator, a tired-looking man named Mr. Peterson, began his spiel about compromise and finding common ground. I barely heard him. My focus was entirely on them. Chloe was radiant, practically vibrating with smug confidence. Julian just looked bored, like a child forced to sit through a parent-teacher conference. Thorne started by reiterating their demands: the house, the car, the alimony, the $2 million. "My client has suffered immensely," he droned on. "She deserves to be made whole." Miss Davenport sat perfectly still, her pen poised over a legal pad, not writing a single word. When he was finished, the mediator turned to us. "Mr. Vance, Ms. Davenport, your response?" Ms. Davenport spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and cool. "My client rejects your offer in its entirety. It is not only unreasonable, it is insulting." Chloe let out a theatrical gasp. "Insulting? I gave him 2 years of my life." Julian, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up. He smirked directly at me. "Come on, Grandpa," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just give her the money so we can all get on with our lives. It's not like you're going to be around to spend it much longer anyway." The room went silent. Even Thorne looked shocked. The mediator cleared his throat, a flush creeping up his neck. "Mr. Croft, your presence here is highly unusual, and your comments are not productive." But the damage was done. The final, unforgivable insult had been delivered. Chloe didn't reprimand him. She just squeezed his hand, a silent endorsement. Then she looked at me. Her eyes filled not with malice, but with a kind of bored pity. "He's right, Arthur," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "I wasted my prime years on you. I sat in that boring house, pretending to be interested in your boring stories. I cooked your boring meals. I deserve something for that. This is just business." That was it. That was the moment any last, lingering ember of compassion I might have had for her was extinguished. It was no longer about betrayal or a broken heart. It was about justice. It was about making sure that people like them, people who saw life as a zero-sum game of taking what they could from others, did not win. I leaned forward slightly and spoke for the first time, my voice low and steady, directed not at her, but at her lawyer. "Mr. Thorne," I said, meeting his gaze, "tell your client to enjoy her day. We will see you in court." I stood up, nodded to Ms. Davenport, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. The battle lines had been drawn, and they had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. The weeks leading up to the court date were a flurry of strategic activity. Ms. Davenport's office became my new headquarters. Unlike Thorne's flashy downtown suite, her office was old-world and understated, filled with dark wood, leather-bound books, and the quiet hum of immense competence. Ms. Davenport was a general preparing for battle, and I was her most trusted field commander. We spent hours poring over documents, mapping out our strategy. "They've taken the bait perfectly, Arthur," she said, during one of our late-night sessions, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the financial disclosure Chloe's team had submitted. "They believe your net worth is $4.2 million. They've built their entire case around this number. Their greed has made them lazy." I had spent the last 6 months carefully curating this illusion. With the help of my personal accounting team, I had restructured my finances. I moved a significant, but believable, amount of liquid assets into a single, easily discoverable brokerage account. I made sure the deed to the house and the car leases were under my personal name. Simple and straightforward. It was a financial decoy, a pot of gold at the end of a very short rainbow, designed to stop them from looking any further. The real fortune, the vast majority of my wealth, was a fortress. It was a complex web of entities. Vance Innovations LLC, a holding company for my dozens of software patents, many of which were still generating millions a year in licensing fees. North Star Holdings, an offshore corporation that managed a diverse portfolio of international stocks and real estate, and the Eleanor Vance Charitable Trust, a massive fund I had established in my first wife's name, which I legally controlled as the sole executor. None of these entities had my name directly attached to them in any easily searchable public database. Unraveling it would take a team of forensic accountants, months, and a level of suspicion Chloe and her bargain bin lawyer simply didn't possess. "So, the plan is simple," Ms. Davenport continued, her eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor. "We let them present their entire case. We let them paint you as the villain. We let Chloe get on the stand and perjure herself, talking about the life of hardship she endured. We will cross-examine, but gently. We just need to get a few key admissions from her on the record." Her strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. We weren't going to fight their narrative. We were going to let them build it into a towering monument to their own greed, right there in the courtroom. Then, at the moment of their presumed victory, we would pull out the foundations and watch it all come crashing down. We also had Frank Miller's file. It was now the size of a phone book, a damning chronicle of Chloe's two-faced existence. The photos, the text messages, the bank statements showing my money flowing directly into Julian's accounts. It was our ace in the hole. "We may not even need this, Ms. Davenport said, patting the thick binder. "The financial reveal will be a cannonball. This," she tapped the file again, "is the grape shot for if she somehow survives the initial blast." On the day before the trial, I met with her one last time. I was calm, resolved. She looked at me, a rare hint of something other than professional steel in her eyes. "Are you ready for this, Arthur? This will be public. It will be ugly." I thought of Julian's sneer. "Grandpa." I thought of Chloe's cold dismissal. "This is just business. Ms. Davenport," I said, my voice firm. I have never been more ready for anything in my life. The day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with a palpable tension. Chloe and Julian were there, sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking like a pair of vultures who could already taste victory. Chloe was dressed in a modest, navy blue dress, a pathetic attempt to look like a wronged, conservative wife. Julian had toned down his look as well, wearing a full suit, though he still couldn't resist leaving the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. They were playing their parts to the hilt. "Mr. Thorne began his opening argument, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. He painted a vivid picture of my wife's supposed suffering. He described a young, hopeful woman, full of love and life, who was slowly crushed by the thumb of a miserly, controlling older man. He used words like emotional imprisonment and a life of quiet desperation. He spoke of Chloe's dreams of starting a family, dreams he claimed I had callously dismissed. This was a particularly galling lie. I had been open to the idea of children, but she was the one who always insisted she wasn't ready to ruin her figure. "Look at her, Your Honor," Thorne declared, gesturing dramatically towards Chloe, who dutifully bowed her head as if in prayer. "Look at this woman who gave up everything for a man who gave her nothing in return but an allowance and a set of rules. She cooked for him. She cleaned for him. She was his companion, his caregiver, his social secretary. And for this, for 2 years of indentured servitude, he believes she should walk away with nothing." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "We are not asking for the moon, Your Honor. We are asking for what is fair. We are asking for what is just. We are asking for her rightful half of the marital estate, an estate valued at approximately $4 million. $2 million. So that this woman can begin to rebuild the life that was so cruelly put on hold." Throughout his entire performance, I remained perfectly still. I did not react. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes fixed on the judge, showing her nothing but quiet respect. I could feel Chloe's eyes on me, trying to get a rise, trying to see a flicker of anger or fear. I gave her nothing. My composure seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst would have. When Thorne finished and sat down, a smug look of satisfaction on his face, the judge turned to our table. "Ms. Davenport." My lawyer rose slowly, the picture of calm professionalism. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "we will reserve our opening statement. For now, we would just like to state for the record that the plaintiff's entire case is built upon a foundation of deceit, greed, and a staggering miscalculation. We will call our first witness at the appropriate time." She sat back down. The entire statement took less than 20 seconds. It was concise, powerful, and deeply unsettling for the opposing counsel. Thorne frowned, confused by our passive strategy. Chloe whispered something to him, looking annoyed. They thought we were on the defensive. They thought we had nothing. The trap was working perfectly. They had no idea they were the ones on trial. After a parade of Chloe's friends, women I'd never met who testified to her deep unhappiness, it was time for the main event. The plaintiff calls Chloe Vance to the stand, Thorne announced. Chloe walked to the witness stand with a practiced fragility, as if a strong breeze might knock her over. She took the oath, placed her hand on the Bible, and sat down, turning a hopeful, teary-eyed face to the judge. Thorne led her through a carefully rehearsed script of her misery. She talked about my refusal to buy her a new car, my insistence on flying coach, my lack of interest in attending charity galas. She framed my financial prudence as a form of abuse. She was a brilliant actress. I had to give her that. When it was Ms. Davenport's turn to cross-examine, she rose and approached the witness stand, not with aggression, but with a kind of gentle curiosity. Her first questions were softballs. "Mrs. Vance, you testified that you love your husband when you married him. Is that correct?" "Yes, of course," Chloe said, her voice dripping with sincerity. "And you knew he was a retired man, a man of simple tastes?" "Yes. I found it charming at first." "Charming," Miss Davenport repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Tell me, Mrs. Vance, you stated you are a freelance graphic designer. What was your approximate annual income the year before you met Arthur?" Thorne objected. "Relevance, Your Honor?" "I believe I'm establishing a baseline for the witness's financial situation prior to the marriage, Your Honor. It is highly relevant." Ms. Davenport countered coolly. "Objection overruled," the judge said. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. I don't remember exactly. Maybe $20,000? $20,000. And you were living in a small studio apartment at the time? Yes. So it's fair to say that marrying Arthur represented a significant improvement in your lifestyle. "I married him for love, not money," Chloe snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. "Of course," Ms. Davenport said smoothly. "Let me rephrase. Would you have married Arthur if he had the same income as you? If he was a retired software engineer living on Social Security in a small studio apartment?" Chloe was cornered. Thorne was frantically making hand signals for her to be careful, but her own arrogance was her undoing. She saw the question as an insult. "No, of course not," she scoffed. "I'm not crazy. A woman has to think about her future, her security." "Ah, her security," Ms. Davenport said, a faint smile touching her lips. "So, love was a factor, but a certain level of financial security was a non-negotiable prerequisite for you?" "Any sane woman would say the same," Chloe retorted, crossing her arms defensively. "And when you first met Arthur, you believed he was a wealthy man, correct?" "I believed he was comfortable," Chloe corrected, realizing her mistake too late. "Comfortable enough that you felt your future would be secure? Comfortable enough that you felt entitled to a certain lifestyle? A lifestyle far beyond what $20,000 a year could provide. I felt I was entitled to be treated like a wife, not an employee." Chloe's voice was rising, her mask of victimhood slipping to reveal the raw greed beneath. "Thank you. Mrs. Vance," Ms. Davenport said, turning away as if the conversation was over. "Just one last thing. You stated under oath that you believe the marital estate to be worth approximately $4 million, And you are demanding half. Is that correct? Yes, that's what I'm owed, Chloe said, regaining her confidence, believing she had won the exchange. Owed, Ms. Davenport murmured quietly to herself, a predator savoring the final moments before the strike. No further questions, Your Honor. She walked back to our table and gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. The pin had been pulled. The defense calls its first and only witness, Ms. Davenport announced, her voice ringing with authority. Mr. Arthur Vance. I walked to the stand, feeling the eyes of the entire room on me. I swore the oath and sat down. Chloe and Julian watched me with contemptuous amusement, as if my testimony was a mere formality before their victory. Ms. Davenport approached me. Mr. Vance, for the record, please state your primary occupation before you retired. I was the founder, CEO, and chief architect of a software company called Quantum Logic Systems. And what happened to Quantum Logic Systems? I sold it in 2008 to a major tech conglomerate for a 9-figure sum. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Thorne's head snapped up. Chloe's smile faltered. And since your retirement, Mr. Vance, have you simply been living off that initial sale? Ms. Davenport asked. No, I replied calmly. I have managed my own investments through a series of private holding companies and trusts. Your wife and her counsel have submitted a financial disclosure estimating your net worth at $4.2 million. Is this figure accurate? No, it is not. Is it off by a little or by a lot? It is off by a significant margin. Ms. Davenport turned and walked back to our table. She picked up a stack of binders, each one at least 3 inches thick. Your Honor, at this time the defense would like to submit into evidence the certified financial statements for my client. These have been authenticated and notarized. She placed the first binder on the judge's bench. This is the portfolio for Vance Innovations, LLC, which holds Mr. Vance's technology patents. As of the close of business yesterday, its value was $92 million. Gasps could be heard from the gallery. Thorne leaped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is an ambush. We were never provided these documents in discovery. On the contrary, counsel, Ms. Davenport fired back, not missing a beat. Your discovery request asked for all personal financial documents belonging to Arthur Vance. These are corporate holdings. You never asked for them. A simple public record search of the Patent Office would have led you to Vance Innovations. Your failure to conduct due diligence is not our fault. The judge, now looking intrigued, silenced Thorne with a wave of her hand. Objection overruled. Continue. Ms. Davenport. She placed the second binder down. This details the assets of North Star Holdings, an international investment firm. Current value, $167 million. The courtroom was now completely silent, the air crackling with electricity. Chloe's face had gone from smug to confused to ashen white. Julian looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Ms. Davenport placed the final, thickest binder on the bench. And this, Your Honor, is the full accounting of the Eleanor Vance Charitable Trust, of which my client is the sole executor and controller of all investment decisions. Its current liquid value is $241 million. She paused, turning to face the judge, the jury, and the entire shocked room. Your Honor, the plaintiff's estimate of my client's net worth was off by a factor of more than 100. The true, conservative net worth of Mr. Arthur Vance is not $4 million. It is just over $500 million. She let the number settle. 500 million. Then she turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Chloe, who looked like she was about to faint. Therefore, Ms. Davenport's voice was now like ice. The plaintiff's demand for half the marital assets is no longer $2 million. It is now a demand for $250 million. Does the plaintiff wish to amend her petition? The silence in the courtroom was shattered by a choked, strangled sound. It was Chloe. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving a pasty, white mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening realization, not just of the money she had lost, but of the sheer scale of the fool she had been. The smirk was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed expression of someone who had just watched their winning lottery ticket burst into flames. Julian was already in motion. His survival instincts, honed by a life of parasitic opportunism, were screaming at him. He saw the money, his money, the entire reason for this charade, vanish in a puff of smoke. There was no payday. There was only a humiliated old man who was now revealed to be one of the most powerful men in the state. He didn't even look at Chloe. He simply stood up, his face pale, and with a speed that would have been impressive on a football field, he slipped through the swinging doors at the back of the courtroom and was gone. He abandoned her without a word, a rat deserting a sinking ship. His departure snapped Chloe out of her trance. Panic set in. She swiveled in her chair and grabbed her lawyer's arm, her voice a desperate, cracking whisper that could be heard across the silent room. "Do something, Marcus. Fix this." Thorne looked as though he'd been hit by a truck. His face was beet red, a mixture of professional humiliation and raw fury at his own client's deception. "Fix what?" he hissed back. "You told me he clipped coupons. You told me he was a retired nobody." Suddenly, Chloe stood up, her chair clattering backward. She turned to the judge, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "Your Honor, wait! There's been a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice breaking. Then she turned to me, tears, real tears this time, tears of pure, desperate greed streaming down her face. "Arthur, Artie, baby, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any of it. It was Thorne. He made me say those things. I love you. I've always loved you. We can fix this. Please." It was a pathetic, grotesque display. She began to walk toward me, her arms outstretched, as if she could erase the last 6 months of lies and deceit with a single hug. "Ms." Davenport stepped calmly into her path, a solid, immovable object. "I believe the witness is excused," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Bailiff, please ensure Ms." Vance returns to her seat. 2 bailiffs moved forward, gently but firmly guiding a now sobbing Chloe back to the plaintiff's table. She collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands, her body shaking with convulsive sobs. It wasn't the sound of heartbreak. It was the sound of a jackpot slipping through a gambler's fingers. The judge looked down from her bench, her face a mask of cold fury. She had presided over thousands of divorces, seen every kind of human drama, but the sheer, calculated, and now spectacularly failed avarice on display had clearly struck a nerve. She looked at Chloe, then at the empty chair beside her, then at me. "Ms. Davenport," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have anything further to add?" "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer replied, picking up the thick binder of Frank Miller's investigation. "We have not yet entered into evidence the documentation of the plaintiff's adulterous affair, nor the forensic accounting of the marital funds she fraudulently diverted to her lover. Mr. Croft. Chloe's head shot up, her eyes wide with fresh terror. She hadn't just lost the jackpot. She was about to be buried under the rubble of the entire casino. The judge held up her hand, stopping Miss Davenport before she could even open the binder. "That will not be necessary. Counsel," she said, her voice sharp as a shard of glass. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Chloe, who flinched as if struck. "Miss Vance, in my 15 years on this bench, I have rarely witnessed such a blatant and shameless attempt at perpetrating a fraud upon this court. You have lied under oath. You have maligned your husband's character. You entered into this marriage not in good faith, but with the predatory intent of a con artist." Each word was a hammer blow. Thorne tried to stand, to offer some feeble objection, but the judge silenced him with a glare that could have melted steel. "You sat there and testified to your emotional suffering," the judge continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation, "while planning to strip this man of what you believed was his entire life savings. You have wasted this court's time and resources with a petition built on a mountain of lies. It is, frankly, disgusting." She picked up her gavel. "The plaintiff's petition for half of the marital assets is denied in its entirety. The plaintiff's request for alimony is denied. The request for the house and the vehicle is denied." Then she looked over at Ms. Davenport. "Counsel, was there a prenuptial agreement in this marriage?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ms. Davenport replied, producing a thin document. "A very simple one. It states that in the event of a divorce, both parties will leave the marriage with the assets they individually held prior to it, and nothing more." "Then that is the order of this court," the judge declared. "This marriage is dissolved. The prenuptial agreement will be enforced to the letter. Ms. Vance, you will vacate the marital home within 48 hours. You will leave with your personal belongings, the things you brought into this marriage, and nothing else." The finality of the sentence was absolute. 48 hours. She was being evicted from the life she had tried to steal. The gavel came down with a thunderous crack that echoed the shattering of Chloe's entire world. Crack! It was over! The judge stood and swept out of the courtroom without a backward glance. The room erupted into a buzz of hushed, excited chatter. Reporters who had been loitering in the hallway, smelling a story, were now scribbling furiously. Chloe remained frozen in her chair, a statue of ruin. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was already packing his briefcase, his face a mask of grim determination to get as far away from his toxic client as possible. "Don't call me," he muttered at her as he turned to leave. "We are done." I stood up and smoothed my jacket. I walked past the plaintiff's table. Chloe looked up at me, her face blotchy and swollen, a desperate, pathetic plea in her eyes. "Arthur, please," she whispered. I looked down at her, not with hatred, not with anger, and certainly not with pity. I felt nothing at all. She was a bad investment I was finally divesting from. "It's not business, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet, for her ears only. "It's character, and yours is bankrupt." I turned and walked out of the courtroom, Ms. Davenport at my side. The cold, sterile air outside had never felt so fresh, so clean. It was the air of freedom. I had not only won, I had survived. I had walked through the fire and emerged, not unscathed, but whole. As I stepped out into the bright sunlight, I left the wreckage of her life behind me in the shadows of the courthouse, a monument to the destructive power of greed. 2 years have passed since that day in court. Life has returned to its quiet, predictable rhythm. But it's a different kind of quiet now. It's not the silence of loneliness, but the stillness of peace. I sold the house, the stage for Chloe's drama, and moved into a penthouse apartment overlooking the city. It's a modern space, filled with light, a place with no ghosts and no bad memories. I've re-engaged with the world, serving on the board of several tech startups and managing the charitable trust with a renewed sense of purpose. I'm funding scholarships, medical research, and art programs, building things, instead of just protecting them. About a month ago, a small, lumpy envelope arrived at my office. It had no return address, postmarked from a town I'd never heard of in the Midwest. Inside, there was no letter, only a cashier's check for $500 and a small, handwritten note on a piece of notebook paper. It said, "For the first month's lease on the Mercedes. It's all I have. I'm sorry." I stared at the check for a long time. $500. It was a pathetic sum, an insultingly small fraction of what she had tried to take, and what she had cost me in legal fees. But it wasn't about the money. It was a flag of surrender. It was the final, whimpering admission of her total and complete defeat. I endorsed the check and sent it to the Eleanor Vance Trust. A final, ironic contribution from the woman who tried to replace her. Looking back, it's easy to analyze the psychology of it all. Chloe wasn't born a monster. She was shaped by a culture that tells beautiful young women that their youth is their only currency, and they'd better cash it in before it expires. Her greed was a symptom of a deeper insecurity, a terrifying fear of being ordinary, of being poor. She saw me not as a person, but as a shortcut, a golden ticket out of a life she felt was beneath her. Her fatal flaw wasn't just greed, but a profound lack of curiosity. She lived with me for 2 years, and never once tried to understand the man I truly was. She never asked about the intricacies of my work, the source of my philosophies, the passions that drove me. She only saw the surface, the quiet, frugal old man, and assumed that was all there was. Could I have done things differently? Perhaps. If I had confronted her immediately after discovering the affair, what would have happened? It would have been a screaming match, a messy, emotional divorce where she would have played the victim, claimed it was a one-time mistake, and perhaps walked away with a settlement just to make her go away. By waiting, by letting her expose her own character so completely, I ensured that justice wasn't just done, but seen to be done. The lesson here is brutal but necessary. When you are dealing with a predator, you do not wound them and let them limp away to recover. You wait, you plan, and you make sure they never pose a threat to you again. The most important lesson, however, is about self-worth. I had allowed my loneliness to cloud my judgment. I ignored the red flags because I wanted the fantasy to be real. Never let your desire for companionship override your instinct for self-preservation. Vet the people you let into your life, not just for their charm, but for their character. True wealth isn't in a bank account, it's in wisdom, peace of mind, and the ability to sleep at night, knowing you are safe in your own home. My message to anyone listening who might feel stuck, betrayed, or underestimated is this: your value is not determined by someone else's inability to see it. Be patient, be smart, play the long game. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to let your enemies believe they are winning, right up until the moment you checkmate them. I often wonder what became of her, and if that $500 check was an act of genuine remorse or just another performance. What do you think? Can a person like Chloe truly change, or was that just her last, desperate attempt to manipulate? And what would you have done in my position? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for listening.